Welcome to Brands Talk, the podcast that explores the world of successful brands and the secrets behind their brilliance. I'm your host, Brigitte a company and personal brand identity strategist. Driven by my passion for brand excellence, we reveal the stories, strategies, and insights from thought leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and experts who have propelled their brands to new heights. With a focus on authenticity, market leadership, and the power of brand storytelling, our conversations are designed to inspire and empower you to elevate your brand's radiance and attract not only the recognition, but also the clients you truly deserve. We delve into corporate branding, entrepreneurial branding, personal branding, and leadership branding, offering valuable lessons for entrepreneurs and business professionals alike. Let's get started and dive into the world of brands. My guest today is Justin Lynch. Justin has been a graphic designer for over 13 years. In that time, he has worked as an internal designer, freelancer, and an embedded designer at an agency. So he's seen all sides of the designer and business relationship. In addition to his experience, he's also been recognized for his work by the American Marketing Association of Houston, winning 2 of their coveted Crystal Awards. I warmly welcome Justin Lynch. Welcome to Brands Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here on my show today. We had already a wonderful conversation when I was a guest on your show.
Mhm.
So today you're a guest on my show, and I'm so excited about diving into design work, graphic work. And you have worked as an internal designer, freelancer, and an embedded designer. You have got a wealth of experience in the design world. So what unique perspective have each role given you on branding, and how do these roles impact the design choices?
Sure, that's a great question to start with.
Yeah.
I would say probably there's two main things that I've learned from seeing all the different sides of it. The first is really from a branding and design standpoint. There's only so much as a designer you can control. So you
Mhm.
have whether you're embedded internally on a marketing team at a company, the CEO, other executives in the business all have some kind of say and influence in the marketing. Whether you want it that way or not, that's just how it is. Also, when I worked internally, I was at a credit union. And so, at least here in the United States, credit unions are nonprofits. And because of that, they have to have a board of directors. So then you have on top of the CEO, you also have to get approval by the board of directors, which is usually anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 people. So at any given time, as an internal designer, I'm not just trying to get approval on a design from my boss, which is usually the head of marketing. I have to get it approved by every decision maker in the organization that has a final say in what gets put out to members as a credit union or in another business, your customers or clients. And so your varying degrees of how much interaction you have with decision makers changes. And if you're
Mhm.
usually an internal designer, you will likely be talking obviously to your boss. You may have conversations with other decision makers in the business, so maybe sometimes the CEO, but at least I never went and talked directly with the board of directors. That was always the head of marketing. As a freelancer, that's your chance. As a freelancer, you have the most direct interaction with the client because you
Mhm.
are talking to the client themselves. And even then, you still may be one step removed from a potential decision maker. So oftentimes, if it's a bigger business, when I've freelanced with larger companies, I usually have a point of contact that might be the marketing director or sometimes the head of sales if they don't have a true marketing department. A lot of times they'll tie it into their sales, gets the marketing budget for the business, but they're still not the final decision maker. There's someone else who has to make the decision in the designs. And really, and we can dive deeper into that, is getting approval on the design. So how do you format the way
Mm-hmm.
you present a design to make sure that it's accepted by all levels of decision makers in a business. And then on the other side, if you're working in an agency, you kind of have that same issue where you may not be working directly with the client. So a lot of times as a designer, I would hand the designs to an account manager who is the point of contact with the client. So you're playing the game of telephone where you're trying to communicate and send information along the line to get it approved. Things can get misinterpreted or misunderstood. So that's one of the big challenges in seeing all those three different things and how they kind of interact with the clients. The second one is also your level of influence on the design. And what I mean by that is how the decision makers perceive you as a designer inside a business. So if you're an internal designer, the chance you have to really influence a decision being made on a design that you've made is going to usually be really low. They'll usually view you as you're just the designer. You are not the strategist. Your head of marketing is a strategist. They are going to be the ones who have to pitch your vision essentially upward. You have very little influence in that decision. As a freelancer, it depends on how you build that relationship to start with. You can have clients that see you as an expert and they just tell you, hey, here's what I need. And, they're expecting you to come up with the strategy and the vision for it and to sell them on that idea. Other people just say, hey, I need an extra set of hands. I just need someone to create designs.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, those may not be the best clients, depending on how you work as a freelancer. Those are the types of clients I typically say, hey, if you just need an extra set of hands, you're better off going to, say, like Fiverr, 99 Designs, just put together a design brief. People will get you designs, but you're not going to get the strategic component of the design. If you want that, then that's when you work with a seasoned freelancer to get the strategic part of a design. And then finally, when you're in an agency, um, you rarely have any influence on the decisions being made by the client, right? Because you're passing it along. It's usually getting pushed through an account manager. They're going to review the designs and they're going to come back and they're going to talk to the account manager. So they may not even know you exist, honestly. And sometimes when you work with an agency, is they just throw the stuff to the agency and say, hey, I need designs for this campaign. The agency kicks it back and goes, hey, here's the designs. You might be one of 3 designers working on that campaign. They don't know. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're in an agency, you have to expect the fact that you are probably unknown to the client and you probably have no interaction with the client. So those are the kind of the 2 big things I've noticed working in different capacities is how you're being viewed as a designer and then what your level of influence is inside with the decision makers of those organizations based on whether you're internal, a freelancer, or embedded with a marketing agency.
Hmm. Wow, that's so interesting. So you went through all these different roles, and what was the ultimate push that made you decide for becoming your own boss, starting your own design agency? What was the trigger on that? Was it to be seen, to take on a more profound role and not just being the designer who works internally?
That's definitely part of it. So I can think back to one specific instance that
Yeah.
really made me start the thought of I really should just be doing this on my own, other than the fact that like now I have to be a salesperson and business owner, but at least as a designer
Yeah.
and saying, hey, I feel like I'm being left out of important conversations. So
Mm.
when I was an internal designer at the credit union, we had one time and the credit union was considering doing a potential rebrand or even a brand refresh. So, kind of keeping a lot of the same components, but changing maybe the messaging and all that.
Mm.
We were on a call. It was me and my boss, who was the VP of marketing at the time. We were on a call in his office with the agency that was going to be helping us do all this. And the conversation was just it felt like it was going nowhere. They would constantly ask things like, well, if the brand was a car, what kind of car would it be? And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't understand how that's relevant. And then they would ask, well, if it was a celebrity, what kind of celebrity would it be? And I know now, at the time I didn't know, and I'm just like, these seem so completely random. I know now at least like what they were trying to get at is to understand the personality of the brand and understand where the brand's looking from and how it wants to talk and everything. But I've never liked those questions even back then. I was just like, this doesn't actually move us in the direction we need to go. It's
Mm.
not getting to the essence of what the brand should be, how it should be presented. And that was the moment when I was like, I feel like I can do a better job of helping position a business and their brand than this agency can. But because they're a hired agency and I'm an internal designer, my opinions aren't viewed at the same level as this agency that was hired and seen as an expert. I was like, I want to be seen as an expert. So it obviously means I need to go and I need to be on the other side of that call, right? I need to be on
Yeah.
the agency side of it at least, or as a freelancer being seen and being hired for my strategic expertise, and not just being, hey, we need you to design something for us.
I totally get that. I totally understand. It's so funny that you say, yeah, if our brand were a car. I ask these kind of questions to my students all the time because it's important to get them out of this traditional thinking and come with something completely strange, completely different, out of the normal, out of the ordinary, to help them get into another perspective. And I have looked to it through a different lens. So they are very appropriate questions, however.
Yeah.
But it seems strange, yeah. But it is relevant, and in market research, we always do something like that. But I totally get your perspective on that. Yeah, so I would love to dive a little bit deeper into the concept of design and branding. How would you describe the relationship between design and brand perceptions? Because we have talked about perceptions now, taking on different perceptions. So, what are some specific ways design can enhance a brand's connection with the audience? Because usually it's always, yeah, to make someone feel, yeah, what does the brand really do? How can we appeal to a client, and how does design relate to that or influence that? What's the relationship?
Yeah, the big thing, at least the way I always approach design, is I always ask, the first question is, who's the intended audience? Who is the person that you want to be viewing this design, interacting with the design? And then the next question is, what action do you want them to take? So that accomplishes two of the biggest parts of any design, which is making the design relevant to the people that you want to see the design and interact with the design, and then driving them to an action, because at the end of the day, we're doing designs in a business setting. We're not creating art just for art's sake. The design needs to actually accomplish some kind of business goal. And because of that, that's where I start. Then what I do is I pull in the brand elements from there, right? So looking at the brand, what is the brand's colors, the tone, the voice of the brand, any other visuals, the topography and everything. But what I'm looking for is saying, if I want to attract this type of person, and this is who the design is for, based on the values of the brand and the way the brand presents itself, what do I need to pull from the brand into the design? So, typically you're going to pull in your brand colors, your fonts. Like, you don't want to go against that, because that creates all kinds of issues. Like if you're looking as a designer, if you're looking at a company's brand and you're looking at who they want to attract, and there's a disconnect between the two, then that needs to be a different conversation. That needs to be a strategic conversation that needs to dive deeper into the core elements of the brand itself. But when you're looking at it purely from a design standpoint, as a designer, you need to pull in the stuff from there and say, okay, I'm going to pull in the colors, I'm going to pull in the fonts. Here's who I'm trying to talk to. Most designers are not copywriters. I don't claim to be a copywriter. So that's another thing I always ask for too, is what's some of the stuff we want to talk about? What's some of the copy? If not, if I have to come up with copy, I can. But typically, you have a copywriter create the copy as well. And then what I do is take all of that information, and the next step is, now how do you take all this and lay it out into a design based on the specifications? So, for example, if we're creating a mail flyer or something, okay, it's got to be so big, and the fonts can only be so small before they become illegible. So you have to figure out where to lay out information. What's the journey of the user as they kind of scan the design? put all of that together. And then for me, that's when I start to look at, okay, what colors need to go where? How does the like, what fonts am I using? Usually a brand guide or a style guide is going to kind of dictate that for me. But that's what I want to look at, is make it all cohesive. So I'm, like I said, I'm really focused on the core goal of the design first, then pull in the brand, make sure it's compliant with the brand. And then after I have my final thing together, that's when I look at it and go, does this fit with what the brand guide's telling me? And I look at any of past examples. So that's another great thing as a designer you should ask for, is ask for past examples of other campaigns that they've done. Ask what was working, what wasn't, what they liked, what they didn't like. Because even if a company says, hey, we ran this last year, they may go, it really didn't do well, or we don't like that anymore. So you don't want to just copy or take from a design, but figure out what was working for them, what wasn't. And then look at, like I said, look at your design compared to what else that company puts out. And does it make sense? Does it go with all of that stuff? And if so, then you're on the right track. If your design almost clashes or stands out from the rest of the collateral, then that needs to be a conversation, if you feel strongly about your design, with someone, because the chance is your design now is going to go against kind of established brand visuals or tone, and that might be a good thing, but it's probably not. And so you need to figure that out. But that's how I approach it, is making sure the design itself at the end of the day, like I said, accomplishes its goal, but then fits in with what the rest of the brand is already presenting to people. Because consistency and
Here we go.
cohesiveness are critical for any kind of brand. So
Exactly. I think that is the core, to have the consistency, even though something has not worked in the past, but still there needs to be the consistency of being recognized, being recalled as a brand, the consistency in the colors. I mean, we know that our brand's evolving, but they are also evolving of what works, what doesn't. There is a change in strategy. And I think and that is my perspective as a brand strategist, is that a brand really creates meaning from within. So they also need to know who they are, what they represent, what their vision is, their values, and how that can be expressed in the brand elements ultimately, right? Because it has a meaning what kind of font size you use, or font style you use, or the colors that you use, or the tagline that you're speaking with. So the brand voice in every respect, right? So what are some subtle elements that make such a huge difference for a brand to be relevant, distinctive, and unique, so they really can stand out of the crowd? What are these core, what is the core recipe for that, in your opinion?
yeah. So one of the, I would say probably the most impactful that I can think of is, and it's not always, and I'll give an example of when it might not be, but most of the time, imagery, in my opinion, is the most important part. So if you have unique images, and this is where a lot of businesses, especially smaller businesses, struggle, right? Is they just want to pull stock photos because it's cheaper, or nowadays you AI generate photos, but those photos look like everyone else's photos. Especially if you use stock photos, someone else can use the same stock photo in a campaign. But in the imagery, is it emotionally connecting with the person? And we know as marketers, the typical things like, okay, you want the person smiling, looking at the camera, those kinds of things. But the subtle things can make a big difference. So for example, when I was at the credit union, one of the big things that my boss at the time was really big on, and it really stuck with me because we could see the direct result of the campaigns and how much better they were than previous campaigns, was we shifted away from what is kind of traditional imagery in credit unions and banking. So like if you had a car loan campaign, a lot of times you'll have someone, they'll be hanging out the window, jingling keys, like, hey, check out my new car. But the problem with that is that almost everyone does it. And it's not, it might evoke the feeling of cool, that feeling when you have something brand new, but it doesn't evoke really the essence of why you need a new car, right? And so what we would do is we would run campaigns, and we would have a campaign, like one of them we did was a father and a son sitting on the back of a car out in the woods. Clearly they're like going on a hike or hunting together, but
Mhm.
that the area that the credit union serves is a more rural community. It has a lot of woods. So connecting the imagery, having people be able to place themselves in that and go, that's why I need a new car, because I want to be able to bring my kids out. We want to go hunting or we want to go hiking. Making that emotional connection is where those like subtle differences of moving away from what's traditionally done in the industry. So whatever industry you're in, kind of looking at what everyone else is doing and saying, can we find imagery that hits a little deeper? Assume your audience is smarter, because that's always a big thing you always talk about is like, oh, you always have to build designs for the lowest common denominator. Like, people are dumb. They don't understand what they're doing. Like, no, people are smart and they can
Mhm.
understand, and you can create imagery that hits at us like past that initial level, right? You hit them a little deeper in an emotional state of like, oh, that's really why I want a car. That's why I need this product or service.
Mhm.
Um, so for me, imagery is always big. Another one that doesn't involve imagery that can be really effective, and this is something you had talked about as well with the brand, is the tagline. So having a consistent tagline um, is so powerful, because all you would have to do with any tagline is you could have the phrase of the tagline on a billboard with your brand colors and nothing else, and people would know who you are, right? So a big one obviously is, Nike's a huge brand, and they could just put "just do it." Don't even have to put the Nike logo on a billboard. Just put "just do it," black and white on a billboard, and you go, oh, that's a Nike ad. Another example here in Houston. So there's a big furniture company, and people might know them all over the world now. Is Mattress Mac is the guy who founded it. But Gallery Furniture, one of their big things is, if you buy furniture today, they'll deliver it the same day to you. So by a certain time, I think as long as it's by like 3 or 4 o'clock, they'll deliver the furniture to you today anywhere in Houston, which Houston's a really big city. So they've run billboards I've seen throughout town, and it's just their brand color, and all it says is "get it today," and that's it. If you've been in Houston long enough, you know who's advertising that. And all they're using is a tagline and a brand color, and that's all it
Mhm.
takes to evoke the
Mhm.
brand recall. So that's where, if you can build that. Now, those businesses have obviously spent millions and millions of dollars to get to that point, but that is where, if you have a unique tagline and you use it consistently, you can leverage that without anything else to be able to build brand awareness.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of brands do that, like Nike, for example, and many others. They run with the tagline. And I also like what you just said is to create a visually compelling brand story, yeah, in your imagery. Yeah, and I think that is when you come up with a slice of life. Yeah. It's like a short video of a couple of minutes or 30 seconds showcasing how that brand integrates into a person's life. And when it comes to telling such brand stories, what kind of role do you think that authenticity as a brand plays in brand design? How else can we translate that into design?
Yeah, authenticity it's such a hard one to do,
Hmm.
but it's really impactful, and it should be done. Every business should do it, but a lot of them fall flat, and a lot of times the issue is not so much in the design, it's in the deliverable of the product or service, right? So as a
Hmm.
designer and as a marketing company, we can say whatever we want to say and present it however, and you can talk about great customer service or show great customer service, but if the moment that a customer interacts with the brand and they don't get good customer service, there's a disconnect, and when you have that disconnect, like, you've lost all credibility as a brand.
Hmm.
So to be able to build that authenticity, it starts with the branding and marketing to establish what your authentic self is as a brand.
Hmm.
But to make it work, that has to then be carried through the organization and be delivered on the product or service. And so that is one where as a marketing team, that's your job. Whether you want it or not, or whether someone else tries to own it, marketing should always own that. Marketing should own what the brand is and carrying that through internally through the organization on how do we present this information to employees, to make sure that employees are living the brand values, that they're giving the same experience. A great example of that is Chick-fil-A. So Chick-fil-A, is extremely well known for their customer service. There's a whole training, as far as I understand. I've never worked there, but as far as I understand, they go through a whole training program when someone's first hired, and they go through and learn essentially what it means to be a Chick-fil-A employee. And there's little things that they do that show that and give that experience to customers. So a great example is if you ever go to Chick-fil-A and you ever say thank you to an employee, they won't say you're welcome. They always say my pleasure. And that is something that is owned by the company, and they've carried that through the entire way. So when you see Chick-fil-A commercials, they're always kind of uplifting. They're about, kind of the hospitality of the place, because that's how they've separated themselves from other fast food restaurants. It's not just a place to get food. It's a place where you're going to feel welcome. You're going to feel valued as a customer. And then they carry that through the whole experience. And so that is how you build authenticity in the brand, is you start with the marketing, but then it has to be carried through the entire way, all the way to your product or service when the customer actually gets to it.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I also say. It's branding starts within. It's what kind of culture do we want to embrace and live? What kind of values, what kind of vision we want our employees to buy in? So very often I see, and also what you're saying is that all these different departments, branding or employee branding, and then marketing and external marketing, that this is not coherent, is not aligned, or also maybe they are still working in silos and not working together and live it as an integrated thing, because one demands the other. So thank you so much. And since we're already talking about kind of pitfalls, are there other pitfalls that you have seen that might prevent the design from fully supporting a brand's message and also a desired audience experience? Because at the end, ultimately, it's about the experience you want the final customer to have, or the final consumer, actually, the consumer who is experienced that, especially in the service sector, when we think about restaurants, when we think about airlines or any other service based companies. So what are the pitfalls that are easily or can easily be resolved?
Yeah. So there's two big ones that I can think of, and they kind of go hand in hand. The first is essentially designing what I call, I don't know if there's a better phrase for it, but I kind of call it like designing to win awards. So you'll see this where a marketing group or whatever, an agency or a marketing team, they'll create a campaign and they try to be really clever with it, or they try to be like really out there and off the wall. A lot of times it's off brand, and whether it hits the mark or not, it's almost designed and was created just for the sake of being different or winning an award or making other marketers like appreciate it, but it wasn't designed with the customer in mind. So that sometimes you're like, oh, well, if we could do this, this would be really cool. It's like, but if your brand guidelines say you really shouldn't be doing that, like, don't do it. And then to tie into that is another issue that tends to pop up a lot. And I see this with a lot of, usually it's more inexperienced designers. And as designers get more experience, it becomes less of a problem. But overcomplicating a design. So trying to get in too much information. And this is where sometimes as a designer, you have to be willing to push back on decision makers in the company if they are essentially almost killing a design before you even design it. And what I mean by that is I've had in the past where maybe you run a campaign and you're trying to accomplish one thing. You want the viewer of that to call the business. And you'll have people go, well, they could also go to the website. So we should put the website on there and our email address and our phone number. And all of a sudden, you're confusing the customer. Even though you're giving them all these options, another option that people always forget about is at the end of the day, doing nothing is always an option. So if you give someone 3 choices, doing nothing is a 4th. So now you're already giving them 4 different ways. You really want to simplify that. And that's where, as a designer, you should push back on that and say, no, look, what's the one action we wanted to take? That's the only thing we're going to ask of the audience in the design. If you want other designs that ask different things, we can do that. And I've done that before on campaigns where maybe your mailers, you want them to call you versus this, digital ad, you want them to go to the website. That's fine. But each design has one intended action. And that's where, like I said, it tends to happen more with inexperienced designers where they try to cram everything into a design. And I always love the quote, and I can't remember offhand who said it, but essentially they said, like, a design is not finished when you can't add more to it. A design is finished when you can't remove anything from it. So that's always been my philosophy.
Exactly. Keep it simple. Keep it clean, right? Absolutely. We have touched base already. You mentioned AI just a few minutes before. So how do you see branding and design evolving with the trends like AI? I mean, we have been working with AI, I think, for several years already and more so now. How is that impacting the way we engage with audiences or audiences engage with brands? So can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, going beyond like any ethical discussions, right? Because that's a whole nother discussion, but AI is here. People are using it no matter what. The big thing with it, and I think the big challenge you're going to see is how do you leverage AI to consistently build content and designs that are on brand? Because as an AI, no matter how much you try to prompt it, it's still going to give you similar information. If you're asking for copy, right? The copy is still going to be similar than someone else's copy. Even if you're like, hey, make it more friendly or make it blah, blah, blah. Like, it's still going to read very similar to other people. Same thing with AI generated imagery, is it's going to still have similar looks. So I think the challenge is going to be, can we find ways as marketing companies, if we need to leverage AI, can we find ways to build effective prompts? And I think that's going to be a skill set that's going to be asked of designers moving forward, is being able to write effective prompts that create imagery that is unique enough and different enough that it's going to stand out and be on brand. And we'll see where that goes. I think as the technology continues to evolve, it's going to be more effective. And as people learn how to kind of use prompts to just, pull the different levers and stuff on the AI to get it to give them what they want, I think you're going to eventually see some really compelling AI work from an imagery standpoint and a design standpoint that is on brand. I think some of it's still not quite there yet. But I think that's where you're going to start to see that. And I think a lot of businesses are still going to want to leverage it. The trick is going to be, right now, at least, if you use AI to generate content or imagery or designs, there needs to be essentially a filter between that initial draft and what gets published and put out in public. So like whether that's your head of marketing, the designer themselves, someone needs to look at a design and go, that's going to work or it's not going to work. And you need to know why and modify it or some way, because if not, just pumping out a bunch of AI generated content, it's going to quickly destroy brands. But that does create the opportunity now for businesses that still leverage unique imagery. So if you are paying to have a photographer come and do your own photos or your own videos, if everyone, or not say everyone, but like if a lot of people all of a sudden are using AI and you're going to go and you're going to create your own handmade stuff, it's going to be even easier to stand out than it was before, because if everyone's looks one way and yours can look another way, obviously there's budgets to consider for that, because you got to get a good photographer or videographer. But I do think at least medium-sized businesses and larger businesses, I do think a lot of them over the years will start to leverage custom made work and appreciate that for the fact that it will easily separate them from competitors who are using AI as a cost cutting measure and not as a way to actually integrate it into their workflow.
Exactly. It shall be integrated. There shall be a synergy, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be several revisions, because
Mm-hmm.
you also want your identity reflected in there, your values, your vision, your brand's tone of voice, right? So this
Mm-hmm.
needs to be in there. That goes in line with your values, with your philosophy, with who you are as a brand. And I think mostly it's also used by small businesses who cannot afford, but they
Mm-hmm.
are very quickly jumping to solutions and not reflecting on how does that go along with who I am as a brand,
Yeah,
either person or company brand. Thank you so
absolutely.
much. So much value that is. Thank you so much. So many nuggets of wisdoms coming today that are truly important for our audience. So I also want to ask you now, because you have been recognized by the AMA for your work. So congratulations
Mhm.
on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. What do you believe contributed to your award-winning designs, and what lessons did you learn from those projects? Could you share something with
Mhm.
us that you believe sets you apart with your designs from any of the others?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me, and part of so people know, when you submit for the AMA Crystal Awards here in Houston, at least,
Mm-hmm.
you have to submit a written like description of what you did. It's essentially a case study of what you did and the results. So for me, I think that's one of the things. Was the designs themselves were great and I loved them, but I think the fact that I can explain and show how I integrated everything, right? I started with, what are the goals of this campaign? What are the goals that we're trying to accomplish? Who is it intended for? Going back to that conversation we had, building it through that, showing them this is how I approach the design, here's the design, and then being able to say, here are the results from those designs. And each of those two campaigns had really great results. Those are things that I think, that's why I think they won, right? So the designs themselves were great, but it was the strategy behind it and being able to understand that I wasn't just designing just to design something. I was doing it with a business intent. And because of that, and because of the process, we got a really great result, which at the end of the day is really validation for the design if you get the result you're looking for, or if you exceed those results.
Wow. Congratulations again. That it really is something. Lastly, I would love you to share some pieces of advice, some tips for businesses, maybe smaller businesses, looking to use design strategically in their branding. Do you have some overall pieces of advice where you say, okay, this is important, this is important, this is important, and this is non-negotiable?
Yeah. Yeah. The biggest thing is know who your intended audience is, right?
Yeah.
So who is your ideal customer or ideal client? Define who that is. Once you have that, and if you already have brand guidelines, then look at your brand guidelines and say, are these colors going to resonate with the people I want to talk to? Is the design or the topography we're using going to resonate with the people we want to attract? And if so, then great. You've already got the foundation. Now you know who you want to attract, and you have the brand visuals that are in alignment with that. But if there's not, if there's a disconnect, make that change now. Start that process, whether it's updating your colors, updating the topography, updating even the visual language. And this is where even just talking with other designers can help you. Even just say, hey, can I grab a few minutes of your time? Can you give me some advice on this? Because there's little things, if you have a brand that is about, has a softer approach, you're trying to be more passionate with the people that you're trying to attract, like round the corners of your photos, right? Taking sharp edges off of visuals, just small little things that can really evoke different emotions in people and the way your design is perceived. And those are little things that if you can think through that and you put that into your design, your brand
Mhm.
guide, and then you start leveraging those consistently, it starts to make a big impact. So that would be my big thing is non-negotiables. You need to know who you're attracting, and then make sure your brand visuals are in alignment with them. And then obviously you want your messaging and tone, but those really start to go into almost the realm of copywriting. And that's where you almost need a copywriter to help with that versus a designer to help with the visual part of it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with regards to how to connect design with your overall branding strategy. And also, I think very important in that regard when it comes to brand elements are also the colors, because colors
Yes.
add a lot of meaning into a brand and increases the recognition of 80%, and if you want to be a softer brand with round edges, and then you come in with something very flashy, that might not go along. So
Yeah.
we also need to think in terms of that. And I
Mhm.
think it also has something to do with understanding who your brand archetype is as a person or as a company, because that very often, or most of the times, appeals to that ideal client that understands itself as a similar personality.
Mhm. Yeah. And, to even go with color, one of the things is going back to knowing who your audience is different cultures perceive colors differently, right? So
Yeah.
like the color red means different things in the United States than it does in China. So knowing who your audience is and who you're talking to will influence what colors are going to give you the emotional response you want. So you've got to make sure you consider that.
Absolutely. When we take it on the next level on the geographic scope, I mean, this
Mhm.
is really very, very relevant. And if you think you're a company and if you have a vision of growing globally, you need to define that at the beginning. If you have the ambition of going abroad into culturally diverse countries, then you need to consider that at the beginning in terms of colors, in terms of images. Yeah, that is maybe not allowed here or there. So there's a lot of facets coming to branding strategies applied on a global level. Thank you so much
Oh,
for
yes.
pointing that out. Okay, I would love to wrap it up with a short rapid fire term game. Are you ready for that?
Okay.
I'm throwing out a
Sure.
term and you answer short.
All right.
Okay, so when it comes to branding, what is top of mind?
For me, it's the promise that you're making to your customers, right?
Mhm.
So what are you communicating and promising to people, and then what do you deliver on that experience when they actually use your product or service?
Mm. Identity.
That one's a good one. I always think of identity as an internal branding thing. Like, how does the brand identify itself in the marketplace, and how does it understand itself, not so much externally? So that's how I always view it: is what is the brand looking for internally, and how does it want to be presented?
Absolutely love that. Design.
Design. Designs. It's really just the movement of information and the layout of information to provide and convey emotion and information to someone who's viewing it.
Hmm. Goals.
Goals. So, what is the end result that you want out of a design? That's, at least in the context of design, that's what I always think of as goals. Is, so what's
Hmm.
that one thing you want the audience to take, and then how do you measure that?
Podcasting.
Um, I love podcasting. So to me, it's the next way of learning, right? So books are
Mhm.
great, videos are great. I think podcasting fills a very unique niche in learning information. It's a great way to learn, especially when you're traveling or on the road. When I used to commute all the time, that's all I did was listen to podcasts.
Yeah, I love that too. It's so enriching and learning from experts, but also from ordinary people and
Mhm.
listening to their stories. I really enjoy that, especially when I work out or I'm off on a walk.
Mhm.
Yeah. And last but not least, what does a brand mean to you?
A brand to
Oh,
me is like the whole component of a business, right? So a brand pretty much is everything that the business is. So it's the team, it's what you get as a product or service that you're offering, it's whatever you're visually putting out there. In some ways, I really feel like brands are synonymous with the company, right? Your company is a brand, and it can't really ever be separated. So you have to make sure everything you do is in service of the brand, because if the brand is bad, then people don't like your company.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your holistic perspective on that, because a lot of people just see a very narrow view of it, what a brand is or should be or represents. But I like that it's so much more than just a visual or an expression of something in visual terms. All right, Justin, where can listeners find you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn a lot. You can just search for Justin Lynch. I think on LinkedIn, my username is like Justin M. Lynch. And then my website is avlier.com, AVLIER.com. So I know it's a little hard to spell sometimes. But if you want to go there, that's pretty much where I offer my design services. You can look it up on LinkedIn as well, which I really need to be more active on the actual business page. But my personal page, I am super active on LinkedIn. So that's usually the best place to get a hold of me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Justin, for being my guest today here on Brands Talk and sharing your wisdom of how to design brands that connect. I appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great.
Thank you. All right.
If you loved the episode, don't forget to hit follow on your favorite app. Share it with your network and drop me a quick rating or review. Your support means the world to me and brings more exciting brand stories to you. Stay tuned for the next episode as we continue to explore the fascinating world of brands. Until then, keep shining.